Hey there, welcome to East and West. Let's talk about Gone with the Bullets.
便是在下。
Released near the end of 2014, this film was directed by Jian Wen and was also shown at the Berlin International Film Festival a couple of months later. The film opens up with a very poetic style of dialogue, very Shakespearean, not just because they use the phrase to be or not to be about 7 times. After we stop being shown nothing but a black screen, we're treated to a 2-minute long speech by this character where the camera slowly zooms out over the entire time. And despite the fact that the entire speech is quite literally just about him being dumped by a woman he failed to impress, it is ridiculously engaging to sit through and kinda hilarious to boot. The opening scene does a very good job at actually setting up the, well, setting. It's the 1920s, China has just become a republic, and the main characters are all powerful men that used to have very lavish and comfy jobs under the emperor, and are now trying to adjust to be able to have that same lifestyle under this new government. So when a young man shows up from another powerful family, trying to launder away some of the imperial money his family has, the two characters that we're now going to be following do the most sensible thing they can possibly think of. They set up a Miss Universe-style pageant for all the prostitutes of the world. You know, as you do. And it's at this point that any illusion of this film actually having a point to it vanishes about as fast as the outfits of the women that we're now seeing. This film is quite clearly completely designed for spectacle. There is no real plot, there's no actual character motivations that really make a difference. This entire thing is just designed to simply be an assault on the senses. And it is wonderful. Quite appropriate to the setting, this thing is completely vaudeville in its presentation, from the colors to the settings. Even the dialogue is actually kind of endearing for how disconnectedly over-the-top bad it is. The things that are being said and the way they're being delivered, these are about as far away from actual human speech as you can possibly get, and yet it fits perfectly in this scenario. Although while we're talking about dialogue, there is one particular joke that happens during this time that I absolutely adore, simply because of how highbrow it is. When these two guys are announcing the next performance for, well, Miss Courtesan competition is literally the best way to call it, they introduce the next musical number by saying, and I quote, "A song so new, Gershwin won't write it for another 10 years. The song in question is Summertime, an often covered jazz song that was originally written by George Gershwin in 1935. This film takes place in the 1920s. That is hilarious to me. And it actually does really look like something from the old days. Not only do they do a really good job with the sets, the props, the costumes, and all that type of stuff to invoke the feel of the 1920s, but there's a particular artistic choice that they do, where the film will actively try to mimic the visual style of films from around this era. Even when they aren't going all out with a full-on black and white, grainy, film reel looking style that they occasionally intercut into. But even the main film itself does a great job at mimicking the same types of camera shakes and even the sped-up effect that a lot of the Charlie Chaplin era-style films are known for. And yes, there's dialogue, yes, there's characterizations, but at some point I just stopped caring about any of it. My guess is about half hour in when they go on a minute-long speech about how the phrase "I do" in terms of wedding ceremonies is somehow related to toilets.
万言，你今天有点反常。
How can you tell? No one's been acting normal this entire film! So he hooks up with this courtesan. Within a day, she's asking him to marry her. Film's words, not mine. She tries shooting him with an empty gun, which was actually apparently a Russian roulette style thing, I guess. Then the moon does this. Although, to be fair, this section is legitimately meant to be the visual representation of a drug trip, but it fits so well into the story anyway, I almost didn't notice. And then they're on a beach, which is apparently also inside a boat, and then there's this spinning robot camera thing, which apparently houses monkeys inside, and I'm not even halfway through the film yet. Unfortunately, the halfway point is where the film decides to actually start dealing with plot. And it's not good. So, from here on out, this film actually tries to start having a point. The main plot, as described, is that while on the aforementioned Luna High, this guy gets into a car crash and kills the woman he was with. After the media gets hold of it, it's either rewritten or misinterpreted in some way, but the story that gets told is that this was apparently a sexually charged murder, and so this guy ends up going on the run. Talk about a far cry from where we were 5 minutes ago. However, even though this sounds like it should be the beginning of its own plot, it really isn't. Because the second part of this film involves him getting arrested in France and then being forced to star in a movie about the murder he committed, where he plays himself wearing a BDSM outfit, also that they can execute him, get footage of the execution so that the fictionalized version in the film can also get executed, except that they're really going to fake his real execution so that when the film goes out, people think he's actually been executed, when in reality they're going to be giving him another identity so he can live in Vietnam. That is 100% accurately and literally the plot of the second half of this film. For about 10 minutes, in which case, afterwards, it moves on to something entirely different. There is a good, I'm gonna say about 35 minutes, where the film completely derails itself by trying to have a plot. The problem, though, is that even in this situation, the film tries to keep the level of absurdity that it was at the start. Except that in the beginning, the absurdity was down to smoke and mirrors performances. It was the type of experience that was visually engaging, which means that you didn't have to care about anything that was actually being said or done. You were just so engrossed by what you were seeing, it didn't matter. This section, however, the absurdity is meant to be about the characters and the scenarios these characters find themselves in. There is nothing shiny here anymore. In fact, the entire color palette takes a turn for the drab for literally this entire time. It's so dull to look at. But the biggest problem I can see besides that fact is that they keep the same type of vaudeville-style dialogue that I was praising at the beginning. But because there isn't anything else going on, you're forced to actually pay attention to the words that are being said. And so when these characters are trying to make connections and trying to actually forward the plot, because the dialogue is so bad, nothing works. The main character we follow has two different relationships in this film. The first one is with this courtesan, and the second one is with this... From what I can gather, she's like a mobster's daughter, I think. I'm honestly not quite sure of her title. Both of these relationships are appallingly written, but I didn't care about the first one because I was just so engrossed about the spectacle. I have to care about this one because it is literally the focus and plot point that is happening right now. The level of focus that this section of the film requires means that the absurd elements are no longer absurd. They're just random and out of place. They are events and people and places that are there simply because the writer wanted them to exist. And the way the movie is structured not only makes it easy to notice, but the director seems to almost be actively trying to force the audience to notice these problems. And it was at this point that any goodwill that the start of the film had brought up with me had now effectively vanished out of the insane, mind-numbing levels of boredom that this section of the film was aiming for. Luckily, there's an opera sequence, and then suddenly everything is back up to the speed it was at the beginning, and it is fantastic. Until, literally, the last minute of the film. And oh, it's a doozy. Never has a film with this much extravagance behind it have an ending that is so out of place, it actively ruined almost the entire film for me. However, right as the film ends, a massive puzzle piece falls into place that I was not aware of when I was watching this. Right before the credits pop up, we see this screen. Well, that's an intriguing way of going about things. So after a quick bit of researching, I found out that the case in question is to do with a man named Yen Rian-shin, who, in the 1920s, did actually murder a courtesan. But in the immediate aftermath of his crime, films, stage plays, and other things of the like started cropping up, seemingly trying to glamorize this event. This film is attempting to mock the ridiculousness of that type of response by recreating a very similar scenario and yet making absolutely everything about it, both in-universe and to the audience, as ridiculous as possible to show the irony of such a statement. But either Jian Wang didn't have the skills to keep the film being as flamboyant as it needed to be to make that type of idea stick, or he thought that by placing moments of sobriety in this film, that it would somehow enhance the effect. It did not. It makes the film worse in actually every aspect. I can see a film like this working, something that satirizes glamorization of horrible events by glamorizing the glamorization of such events. But if they're going to do that, the events and the details have to be so far down that you actively have to think about the fact that, oh yeah, there's a crime that's just been committed. That's a pretty major one as well. The fact that they're pulling focus to this idea means that any absurdity is out of place. It has effectively become what it is that it's trying to mock. And it can't even do that properly. All in all, the best way to describe this film is a letdown. It had such promise at the start, and if it had kept it up there, this would have been an incredible film. But it just doesn't. It tries going to places that it shouldn't, and it just winds up sucking the fun out of what was already there. And so considering how the film ends up, despite the fact that I think there are really good and really well done and clever moments in this, I have a hard time recommending anyone actually seek this thing out. This is a film I am not likely to ever want to watch again. Well, maybe the first 15 minutes. I give this film 2 golden guns and a red windmill. So that was my review of Gone with the Bullets. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching. Till next time.